Hello, hello, and welcome. Super excited to be here with you today. It's Shondell from Life Puzzle, and we have a very special segment for you today. We're going to talk about cool KPIs. This is really how can you have fun, meet your expectations, meet your KPIs, and get recognition in the process. I work with a lot of salespeople and also business owners who are doing sales function, and a lot of the time I get a lot of feedback about what's working and what's not working in your sales process. And often what can happen is when we're not meeting our expectations or we're not meeting our results, often the feedback is, I'm just not a very good salesperson, or the problems and the objections that come up consistently is that people tend to then put the blame outside of themselves, and they talk about, market conditions, or we need to switch our offers, or we need to do something differently in order to be able to achieve that. And so what I want to share with you here today is how can we create cool KPIs, meeting our expectations, having fun, and getting that recognition. Now, if you're joining me in the group and you'd like access to this workbook that I'm going to take you through today, then simply just pop workbook in the comments below and we'll make sure that we get that straight out to you. Or if you're watching this on my page, just go ahead and click the button below and you will definitely see that will arrive in your inbox shortly. So as we get into today's session, I think one of the most important things that we need to address around KPIs is that often if we're not measuring the success of what we're achieving or what we're not achieving, is we tend to make errors in terms of what to tweak and what to change. In fact, I just got off a coaching call with one of my sales coaching clients, and they were having some challenges in terms of their lead delivery. They're having some challenges in terms of their conversions. And what we know is that success leaves clues, and mistakes or our mistakes of things will actually leave clues also. And so if you're not measuring what you're doing with your activity, then it's really hard to identify where you need to make tweaks in order to make those shifts and those changes. But more importantly, what starts to happen is the psychology is affected significantly for your team and also for yourself in terms of what results are really possible. And that brings me to an experience that we had a number of years ago where I was coaching a business owner, and she was in tears on the phone. We hadn't been working together very long, but she was really putting a lot of effort into sales activity and new client acquisition. And she rang me in tears and she said, I'm just not a very good salesperson. And I just don't think that I can sell, and I don't know if I should be in business anymore because I'm just not getting this traction. And what was really interesting was once we calmed her down and said that we were going to work on fixing this, we had a conversation about what she was doing in terms of her sales activity. And we went through the process of her sales steps and identified that it wasn't so much that she wasn't a good salesperson, because she had opportunities and she was talking to people in terms of opportunities. What was happening was that she was speaking to a lot of people and then getting to the point where she came to talking about pricing and packaging, and that was generally when the inquiries would drop off. And so what we know is that if we have clear ideas around what the metrics are at each step of the sales process, then we also know what we need to tweak and what we need to adjust. Because if we don't know that, then generally what happens is people throw the baby out with the bathwater. They feel like they need to start again. And of course, that causes a lag in terms of our activity, which then causes a lag in our results. Now, you might be standing there thinking to yourself, well, why are KPIs important? Like, what does that matter in the context of business? And I'd like to give you a little example around what this actually helps us with. And I don't know how many of you are watching that actually have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something that you use in order to track your activity in terms of the exercise that you do, or perhaps the amount of steps that you take in a day. And what can sometimes happen is that if we don't have a measurement of what we're doing, we sometimes fall into the trap of either thinking that we've done much more than we've actually done, or we've done less than we actually have done. And so I remember when I first got my Fitbit, I was thinking that I was a pretty active person, that I was doing a lot of activity. And sometimes I'd look down at my Fitbit and I'd see that I'd only done 3,000 steps, which to my surprise, when I was feeling like I'd had a really, activity driven day and that I'd done lots of activity, it was a bit of a surprise and a shock. and I found that, well, hey, I've only done 3,000 steps. Now I can make a decision around what extra activity I need to do in order to get to my metric of 10,000 steps a day. And there were some days where I would look down and I'd feel like I hadn't been very active at all, and I'd look down and I might have 7,500 steps, in which case that gave me some choices and some opportunities in terms of what I wanted to do or what I needed to do to either get to my target or even to exceed my target. And so my little tip for you today, if you take nothing else away from today's segment, is that what gets measured gets done. And when we have a measurement or a metric around the activity that we're doing, we can then have a look at the outcomes that we're getting and decide whether or not what we're doing is actually delivering us a result. And so one of the first things that I really want to talk about today is this concept of training trust and certainty. Now, I know we've got a lot of entrepreneurs in this group. We've got people who run businesses. Some of you have sales teams, and some of you are doing sales activity on your own, and some of you are sales professionals. And so often what I'll talk about is the metrics that salespeople have in terms of their confidence in being able to meet their KPIs. So if you do have a sales team and you don't have key laid out metrics for them in terms of their targets and what they're needing to achieve, then we definitely need to jump on a call and have a chat about that, because what gets measured gets done. And if people have clarity around what it is that they're doing, then it's a lot easier to guide and to manage them. So if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to scale your sales, then I highly recommend that you jump onto 3sales.me/call, and we can sort this out for you. But what's really important here is I often talk about the trust and certainty scale. And for those of you that have followed me for a while, I generally talk about the trust and certainty scale when it comes to handling objections with prospects and with clients. And so if we have this here, which effectively we have, the measure of trust, say from 0 to 10, and then we have the measure of certainty also from 0 to 10. What we often find is that generally when people have low trust and they have low certainty, they tend to come up with a bunch of objections. So they operate in the red zone, and we get a bunch of objections about why we can't do this. So speaking about your sales team, or potentially even about yourself, if you're the person who's actively selling, what we find is if we have low trust and low certainty in what we're trying to do, we get a lot of objections about why we can't do something, why it's not working, why we need to change a bunch of things. And effectively then we get a higher order or a higher level of procrastination, which, as you know, procrastination feels good at the time, but really you're only messing yourself over in the end. And so when we look at a high level of trust, a low level of trust and a high level of certainty, generally what we have here is we have people with a skeptical kind of attitude. So we get a lot of skeptics. So we might be laying out to the team that they can achieve a certain amount of resources or results in a particular situation. They may have trust that that may be possible for other people, but they're not very certain that they can actually achieve it. Then we have, if somebody's got a high level of certainty, but also a low level of trust, then there might be a situation where they find themselves with some confidence either in their own ability to do something, but a low level of confidence in the product or the company that they're representing, or perhaps a low level of confidence in their sales manager or the owner of the business, or a low level of trust, such as in the business owner or the person who is managing their sales activity. When we have a high level of trust and a high level of certainty, what we have is we have people taking action. And so if you have a group of people who are selling on your behalf of your business, or if you're a person who owns a business and you're selling your own services, or you're doing your own sales process at the moment, this idea of putting in place your KPIs and the metrics that you're measuring will actually help you to build your trust and certainty around the various areas of what you're actually achieving. And so when we look at this, what we know is that what gets measured gets done. And so by identifying, and this is something that if you haven't done it today, I highly recommend that you stop what you're doing after this live and that you go and have a look at what's happening in terms of your metrics and what you're focusing on. Because you see, when we look at our metrics, we always have an idea of where we actually want to be. And in NLP, we call this the desired state, or the desired outcome, or the results that we actually want to achieve. Now, for you, that might look like your turnover. It might look like your profit margin. It could look like the number of sales that you'd like to make in a particular month. It could be based on the new acquisitions, etc. And so we have a desired state or a desired outcome. But for a lot of people, they will set targets or they'll set goals without actually identifying where they are now. And so therefore, they have no real concept of the present state or the present outcomes or the present metrics that they have to be able to identify where they want to be. Or even if they do have an idea of this from a revenue perspective in terms of their starting state to where they want to be in terms of their targets, then often they haven't identified what are the small steps or what are the singular areas that is going to help them to bridge that gap. And so what we're looking for here is a way to be able to identify what are the measurements that actually need to bridge that gap. Now, this is, planning 101. Some of you are probably sitting there thinking to yourself, well, Shondell, yes, of course, I have an idea of a target. I have an idea of where we're at. I definitely need to bridge the gap on that. But my question to you today is not whether or not you're doing that, but what are you measuring as being the gap? And how well have you chunked down those measurements into daily activities, daily tasks, and things like that? And so what I often talk about is the fact that our KPIs or our metrics are often what we call a lagging indicator. So for most sales departments that I've worked with, or for most business owners that I've worked with, often they'll set a target for a month, and then at the end of the month they'll have a look and say, well, how do we go with that? And unfortunately, because it's a historical number or it's a historical piece of data or a lagging indicator, what generally happens is they go, well, we missed our target this month, and there's nothing really that we can actually do about that. So one of the things that we often talk about is critical actions or critical drivers that then contribute to the KPI. And so if you've been in the group for a little while, or if you've watched some of our other content, we talk about the fact that there's differences between your sales and marketing. So, your marketing is about bringing people to the door. Your sales is about helping them walk through it. We often talk about the differences between leads and clients and the things that separate them. And so often we will not have clarity around what's the difference or what's the measurable difference between what our organization would call a suspect versus what is an actual prospect. How do we identify and then qualify the prospects that we have, that they are indeed a fit? And so a perfect example of this, at the beginning of this video, I was talking about a lady that I worked with many years ago who was on the phone crying in tears about the fact that she just didn't think that she could sell, and in her small business she was never going to be able to get the level of clients that she needed in order to build the kind of business that she was wanting to build. And as we went through, we actually identified that in this model, she actually had plenty of suspects, plenty of prospects, lots of people that were inquiring for her services. They had a need for the service, but when it came to the qualification period and the convinced and enrolled period, this is where the sales cycle was actually breaking down. And so one of the key things that she wasn't doing was actually making sure that she was qualifying the leads that she was spending time with, which resulted in her spending hours and hours and hours doing prospective sales meetings with people that were never going to be able to be in a position where the need matched their ability to actually pay the prices that she was asking for her products. And so I want you to just stop for a minute and ask yourself whether or not you've got a really clear, ironclad qualification process for your prospects, because depending on the level of need for your service in the marketplace, you might have buckets and buckets and buckets of inquiries coming through. But then when your salespeople are actually going through the process of building that need and inviting them to enroll in your service, they might be struggling to being able to get them across the line, simply because they're talking to people who were never qualified in terms of the affordability of the product for the need that they actually have. And we see this all the time in the personal development industry, where lots of time people have a really significant need for the thing that's being offered, but they don't necessarily have the budget or the funds put aside to be able to afford the product. It's not that they don't see the value in it. It's more that perhaps maybe they're not the right target market in terms of affordability. And unfortunately, what happens with sales professionals is that when they encounter a lot of these opportunities and they encounter them consistently, what generally happens is the itty bitty shitty committee comes out and they start telling themselves that the product's too expensive, and in order to be competitive in the market, they need to discount prices. And if your sales professionals actually have the ability to apply discounts, which by the way, I'm not a big fan of, which you've probably guessed by now. If they have the ability to apply discounts, then often what's going to be happening is they're going to be cutting into the margins on the sale in order to get the deal across the line. And so with this lady, what was happening is she was getting buckets and buckets of inquiry. She was consuming hours and hours of her time, giving free advice, delivering sales prospective calls, only to find that when it came time to pitch or to actually bring the contract out, that many of these people were not necessarily in her target niche because they couldn't afford her service. And so my top tip for you today as part of this is to make sure that you're really identifying and measuring at each of these steps. You know, how many prospects, how many suspects have you got coming in? How many of those then are actually, you know, raising their hand because they genuinely have a need and they're ready to, you know, engage in the prospect of understanding whether they'd like to buy? Have you identified whether they're a fit? Have you qualified them based on your service offering, the price point, time, resources, energy, etc.? And are you actually taking that to the next level and moving them through? And what we often do when we work internally with teams and we design some of these strategies, we start to look at the percentage ratio of the conversion between each of these aspects. And so my client that I was talking about the other day had, or earlier in this live, my client that I was discussing actually had a very high amount of leads being generated, a high amount of sales calls that were kind of, you know, 10-minute check-ins to see whether or not they actually had a need. And then through the qualification process was where she was getting a lot of drop off because they weren't actually really qualified, or she didn't have a distinct qualifying process to identify that they weren't her target audience until she'd already existed a fair amount of cash in that process. And so when we look at that, we look at this client who potentially had, you know, loads of leads coming in, and so she would potentially get 100 leads in a month come through, and out of those people that were suspects, out of those that step between the prospects and the lead generation, there was probably about 50 people that, you know, said, yes, I absolutely need your service. I definitely need that. So we're already looking at a 50% conversion in terms of leads versus people who were actually leads. And so this is a top tip for those of you that might have digital marketing agencies, or you might have people working with you to try and generate leads for your organization. You know, what is the quality of the leads, and then how many of them are actual leads that you would invest time in that are identified as key clients? From her prospect identification into her sales meeting, we generally had a high conversion as well. So she was, you know, potentially putting most of those people, on average, 100% of the people that she identified as prospects would go forward for a meeting. Now, these meetings were anywhere between 30 minutes and 60 minutes long, which means that we currently had 50 meetings that we were having. And then in the process of being able to, you know, generate a contract or to get the enrollment process happening to go to onboarding, we were having a huge drop off in the sense that 10 people would be interested in even pursuing the conversation around the contract, and out of that contract she was only getting 5 of them into the onboarding process where it was signed, paid, and actually invested. And so, you know, what we're looking at here is a 5% conversion, but the problem is not in the ability to be able to convert, it's the problem in the quality of the leads. And so this lady was, you know, potentially convincing herself that she couldn't be a good business owner and couldn't be a good salesperson based on numbers that she wasn't measuring accurately, because what she was looking at was, I have 100 people that are qualified prospects, which they weren't. And then she's saying, and only 5 of them I'm managing to convert. And so your self-confidence and your mindset is impacted significantly by the metrics that we measure. And I see all too many people measuring on the outcome or the lagging indicator of the KPI being the target, but not necessarily looking at the activities that we're doing to actually generate that. And particularly for those of you that are founders or business owners that are still doing the sales yourself, I often see a lot of people wasting a lot of time, and I say that with a lot of respect because I know many of you think that you're doing what you should be doing in order to get the results that you really want, but it's not converting in the way that you want. And for this reason, we created our Confident Conversion 90 Days to More Cash, More Clients, More Impact, to identify some of these things and more of them. And so if you know that you need some help in this area and that you'd really like to take this conversation to the next level so that you can leverage your time, Ensure that you're spending your time on the right things and measuring your metrics based on the activity that's going to produce you the biggest result, based on really leveraging those results. And I really encourage you to take action and jump on a 15-minute power call with us, where we'll take a look at what's going on with your sales and marketing systems. Take a look at what's working for you right now. All you need to do is head to 3sales.me/call, jump on a call, and we'll make sure that you have at least 3 actionable items that you can take away that's going to impact your conversion significantly this week. So for those of you that have been tuning in, remember, what gets measured matters. And if you like this video and you want to see more of this stuff, then come and join us over in the NLP Sales Mastery Academy. If you're not a member already, then we'd love to see you over in the group. We've got some awesome gifts and some very very interesting, intriguing trainings that's going to help you to take this to the next level. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in on cool KPIs, and I trust that this has been useful. I look forward to seeing you over in our NLP Sales Mastery call or on a power call very, very soon. So until we meet again, it's Shondell from Life Puzzle. Be well and be empowered. Bye for now.